I have been sick for the past couple of weeks, and when I was thinking of recipes to make, honestly, nothing sounded good until I thought of blancmange. Blancmange is the dish that Joe brings Laurie when he's feeling sick, and so I thought it would be the perfect dish to try this week. I was also interested in learning about what kitchens looked like in that Victorian era, so I investigated and I'm going to tell you today. The first recipe for blancmange is from the 13th century. Today's version is inspired by a recipe published in 1837 by Miss Leslie in her book titled Miss Leslie's Complete Cookery. It was the most popular cookbook of the time, and most middle-class homes would have had it, together with the Bible and the Pilgrim's Journey. I deviated from the original recipe a little bit because it calls for isinglass. Editing me to say it's pronounced isinglass. Now we know. Which is a type of collagen obtained from the swimming bladders of fish that I don't have access to, so instead of that I used gelatin. To make my version of Miss Leslie's blancmange, you will need 2 cups or 500 milliliters of heavy cream, 110 grams or half a cup of sugar. I used 5 gelatin sheets, and I'm telling you, I think that was 1 too many. I would use 4. 55 grams or half a cup of peeled almonds, half a teaspoon orange blossom extract, 1/4 of a teaspoon nutmeg, 1/4 of a teaspoon cinnamon, and a pinch of salt. While the gelatin sheets are hydrating in cold water for 5 minutes, we're going to grind the almonds and then add the heavy cream, almond paste, sugar, and spices to a pot. We're going to simmer that for a couple of minutes and then sift the mixture before adding the orange blossom extract and a pinch of salt. We're going to pour it into a mold or teacups, as I'm doing here, and refrigerate for at least 5 hours. While our blancmange sets in the fridge, let's talk a little bit about the March sisters' kitchen and what it would have looked like. Sadly, finding this information is not as easy as I would like it to be. Domesticity has never been seen as something worth keeping record of, and there's just not a lot of information about kitchens and how they evolved in this time. All I truly could find were more generic things that I still found extremely interesting, but yeah, I'm a bit bummed that there's no book of the evolution of kitchens in the 19th century, because I would devour that. It doesn't exist though, that I know of. Please tell me if it does, because I will read that front to back. But this is what I found about Victorian kitchens at the time. Something that was really interesting is that in the 19th century, the ideas around kitchens, and more than that, just home economics, were starting to change. And this scientific approach to the home was starting. This was very apparent to me when I was reading these books, because they give you very strict recommendations for everything, like where to put your flour, how big your kitchen should be, where things should be placed. So for example, in this book, The American Woman's Home, there are even diagrams with the proportions a kitchen should have, how big the gap should be between your heater and the shelves. And it's really interesting that some people were being so prescriptive about it. They also describe the kitchen as the workshop of the family. And what I saw in many of these books is that they emphasize the same things that are just common sense even today, like the importance of ventilation, for example, or the importance of natural light. It's nice to see that this has been around for so long. Also sad that I still don't have natural light in my kitchen, but hey, someday. Even though they were talking about some of these things that are still common knowledge today, a kitchen in 1860 looked very different from a kitchen today. First of all, they did not have electricity, so they were working under oil lamps, candlelight, sunlight, and most people would be carrying their water from an outside pump into the kitchen. Also, most gas stoves were just starting to appear in cities, so the most common way of cooking was just cast iron over coal or wood. Refrigeration at the time meant an ice box, which you would literally cool with ice that would be delivered to your front door. I couldn't live without a fridge. The last point about a kitchen at this time is something we see in Little Women.
Merry Christmas!
Oh, Merry Christmas, Hannah! The table looks beautiful, Hannah. Hannah, you do beat the Dutch.
Women knew how to cook some dishes, but they wouldn't do it most of the time. The head of the home would be in charge of the budget and the menu. She would be directing the servants who were actually cooking the food, but they would not be cooking the food themselves. It's really interesting because we see that when Meg gets married, she has to learn to cook. She has to cook. And that's one of the ways that we can see that her social status is changing through this marriage. She no longer has help at home. Victorian books went beyond cookbooks and home economics books, and I was interested in seeing what nursing looked like at the time. I read parts of this book, Florence Nightingale's Notes on Nursing, published in 1859, and I was so shocked. First of all, she points at some very common practices today that I think are really interesting. She talks a lot about the importance of ventilation again and natural light again, but also mental health. So there's even a passage where she talks about how it's really important to change the things that sick patients can see so that they don't get bored with like looking at the same blank wall day after day. And I thought that was so interesting. She talks about what she perceived as good conversation topics and bad conversation topics, like don't tell sick patients that everything's gonna be fine and just try to give them hope when they know that's not the case. And I was like, yeah, she was also pretty like strong in her opinions. I'll try to find some of the quotes where I was like, oof, Florence has opinions, and put them here. But yeah, all in all, really interesting. And the most shocking part to me was at the end of the book, I found this table that reports the ages of nurses at the time, and 508 domestic nurses at the time were between the age of 5 and 10, which is just crazy to me. And almost half of all nurses were under 20 years old. Insane. I'm grateful that some things have changed since then, like, you know, nurses having to have some training and not being 5 years old, but some haven't. And one of the things that hasn't changed is how delicious this blancmange is and how much you want to eat it when you're sick, like I am right now. I'm going to go make some tea and I will see you next week. Bye.